right, I think we'll just go ahead and get started. We're going to be talking about electrifying confidently, how to begin incorporating EVs into intermodal fleets. Today's webinar is sponsored by TeraWatt. I'd like to take a moment and just introduce today's speaker. We're joined by Peter Cohen, who is the Senior Director of Business Development with TeraWatt. Peter studied environmental engineering at Yale, focusing on the intersection of transportation and emissions reduction. After starting his career in investment banking at Credit Suisse, he has worked in strategy and operation roles in transportation, BMW iVentures and DoorDash in particular, finding ways to integrate new technologies and advance industries. Peter has been with TeraWatt since 2021, leveraging his financial and strategic background to work with our partners to create strategic relationships and produce solutions that accelerate them on their EV journey. Peter, welcome. We're very glad that you're here today to talk about what you do. So please, take it away.
Thanks so much, David. And just thanks to the audience. Like David mentioned, we want to make this interactive, not just me talking at you, but really the goal for this. And we appreciate you taking time out of your days. You're all operators in some sort. So hopefully we can make this really interactive. We'll learn a lot together and just share what we've found as TeraWatt, embarking on the EV journey, which is early days, but growing pretty rapidly. So for an agenda of what I will cover, we're going to talk a little bit about who we are here at TeraWatt, why I'm speaking to you, what to know as you get started on your EV journey. And I know that we have a varied audience, so it might be you're starting at different stages. You might already be well along in that journey, but hopefully we can cover some content that's applicable to everybody. So we'll talk about charging considerations, challenges, and solutions to hopefully, give you confidence that as you're approaching this, you have good amount of information to know what you need to be solving for and where and when. So who we are here at TeraWatt, we've raised $1 billion of capital to commit our efforts towards electrification. So we are fleet focused, and primarily what this money is going towards is developing charging solutions across the country. California obviously gets a lot of focus, and we'll talk a little about that, but there is a lot of country outside of California. So we are working in many states and have 14 sites in development. This is a big year for us with a number of them coming online, but it's really an inflection point in the industry and for us as the next years really start ramping up. We can talk a little bit about 2027, 2030 goals. I know a lot of folks are figuring out what they're working towards and working backwards from there. And we want to make sure that you have a good strategy in place with the information and hopefully good partners. And then, why are we doing all of this? What's the purpose of electrification? There's obviously a lot of considerations and challenges associated with this newer technology, but the purpose really is to reduce emissions. There's the International Council on Clean Transportation showed this at least 63% emissions reductions from a life cycle perspective for EV trucks relative to diesel. That can go up to 84% with renewable energy alone. So the goal here really is to do some good for the planet while still operating businesses. I know most of the audience, and I saw some attendees and where they're coming from, operate trucks themselves or indirectly operating through partners. That's obviously why you're here today. Understanding what does this mean for your business and how can you reduce emissions while still, this is a mission critical asset for you. If we talk about where to start in your EV transition, the first and foremost thing I would say is figure out who, relative to who you are, who are the other people at your company that need to get involved? Who are the decision makers? Alignment from the top is key, as you're going to have to be bringing in facilities, equipment management, finance, sustainability, really understanding from a corporate level what this means to your business. That's obviously varied business by business, depending on what fleet means to you. But having that alignment and understanding who all needs to be involved is really important before you start, moving on this journey. Understanding your goals is also critical. So I mentioned, there might be a number of factors influencing why you are adopting electric vehicles that could be coming from your own corporate sustainability goals, those of your customers that you engage with. And on top of that, obviously, there's a lot of government mandates that are starting to come out to encourage and restrict adoption in varied markets. So understanding what that looks like for you, if it is a 2030 goal that you're working towards, and understanding where to start and work backwards from there. Having a good plan before you start going is really important, so you know what the milestones you need to hit. I think the biggest thing I could say is start early in all of this, because no one wants to be on the back foot with their back against a wall when they have to figure out new technology and what it means for their business. So I think proactive adoption, even if it's starting with a one vehicle pilot at one location, is extremely important, so that you know what this technology means for your specific business. You've figured out a little bit more about operating that, have partners in place to figure out what you are doing in-house as well as externally, and have a scaled plan. So the core three buckets for us here at TeraWatt with respect to that is one, to know that you have a good team in place with a partner that can handle your needs, whether it be in a singular location or a scaled plan. Two would be the solution itself. So obviously, if you were looking at a national strategy for electrification, what you need in one state or one location within a state might be different from the next in terms of what you're looking at from power availability or space, operational, use case of the vehicles and your driver patterns. There's a lot of nuance to moving freight, and understanding what that means with respect to charging is something that you'll have to consider, both in what that means for charging as well as your partners and the solutions you're putting in place. And then the third thing is to know about operations. So the day that the charging goes operational, there's been a lot of work to that end. And I think that's where a lot of focus gets put on charging with respect to engage with your utilities and your permitting and zoning and upfront capital. That's all very true and extremely important. But then this day the charging goes live is really extremely important for the business and the job that is getting done, which is working every single day. So understanding you have a plan in place for operations and maintenance and support to know that if there is a problem with the charging, you have a solution in place. So I think in all of this, the theme would be plan ahead. I know that I've heard the phrase of you don't know what you don't know sometimes in this business, which I think is very true. And so making sure you're coming to a webinar like this and hopefully learning something new, engaging with partners, getting the resources you can to make sure that you're well prepared to engage on this new journey. So more about charging and why does it get such a complicated and it's hard and all these adjectives thrown at it. I think it scales pretty exponentially with respect to a number of factors. We have a lot of skiers here at TeraWatt, so we have this green, blue, black diamond kind of analogy. So hopefully that translates. But if you look at like a 10 cars, 10 passenger vehicles charging scenario that you want to put in a facility, we call that the easy route. You could do L2 charging, which is basically the kind of charger you or I would put at our garage with the equivalent power from your washing machine. So tens of thousands of dollars if you're putting in 10 of those. You can work with the local electrician. This is a relatively easy thing to accomplish. For intermodal, obviously, we're all talking heavy duty vehicles here. And so we don't have that ability. But starting in the trucking department, the scale is really important. And I think that's another factor. And we talk about planning here is what scale are you solving for? Is it the charging of today and understanding what you're putting in, or is it a solution that you want to fix over time? And the amount of money and time and planning there really scales pretty dramatically. So if you look at the extremely hard category, that's 100 trucks charging, and that might be 10 megawatts of power, maybe tens of millions of dollars. It might be upgrades to capacity, new lines of service, different things there. This does scale pretty dramatically. So again, back to the concept of don't want to be stuck on your back foot and be proactive is figuring out, again, what is your plan going to be to figure out the charging if it's a pilot phase today. And as you really start ramping up in terms of utilization and percentage of your fleet that is electric, what that means in terms of, are you distributing across multiple locations? If you're saying I want to electrify 100 trucks, is that 10 in 10 locations? Is it 101 location? The answer of what that might be from a CapEx perspective, from a timing, from the actual solution might vary. And so there's considerations and pros and cons to both. And a lot of what I'm saying here also is understanding that it depends, and what that answer might be is different from fleet A to fleet B. So, figuring out what's best for you is really important here to make sure that you have a strategy that gets you to your business goals. So we mentioned California gets a lot of the focus, both from a push and pull perspective of encouraging adoption, as well as giving incentives and grants on both the chargers and the infrastructure and the vehicle side of things. But there is a large country outside of it. And we are very, dedicated to making sure that we're building a scaled solution across the entire country. For us at TeraWatt, these three core corridors are important for us in terms of where we're focusing. Obviously, on the heels of the announcement 2 weeks ago about the Biden administration's focus on corridors, there's a lot of overlap, which is great. And I think that just gives the industry a lot of confidence to focus together and make sure that, if you are looking in markets that are adjacent to the core of, called Los Angeles, you're not alone. And you have other industry folks, either in the infrastructure side, on the shipper or the carrier side, that are working in conjunction with you, so that there's not a lot of burden or risk just on, going out alone to figure out, I want to be electrified in Kansas City or another intermodal hub that otherwise you'd be by yourself on. So we're committed to the entire country, and it's really important to us, but you need to start somewhere. And I think that's another piece, is just figuring out what is that scaled plan and the roadmap together as you look back to your goals. So when you assess your electrification strategy, the first thing I would consider is getting a sense of what are the routes that your fleet is running. So intermodal is great because a lot of that is centered around a rail hub, shorter routes that can be predictable. And all of that is really good for EV, given the range considerations of the vehicles today. And what we hear a lot is folks saying, okay, great, I have a facility nearby the rail hub and I would love to put charging on it. That may or may not be a solution that works, and it may or may not be a solution that works in every single location. And so reasons why that would be are you have to figure out, do I have space for this new equipment? Some places have extra land and parking that you can take over for charging equipment, but this is something new to be brought onto a facility that wasn't initially designed for it. So it's just a consideration and something that to think about of when you're figuring out where that first deployment goes or that fifth deployment, the space to accommodate that equipment is important. Power is a huge one, and that gets a lot of attention too. Working with your utility, I would say contact them early and often to make sure that you have a sense of what is the power, how long would it take to get the power that you would need for your infrastructure, and the most important probably variable in figuring out if charging is capable at a site, as well as what it looks like to get it to the level that you would need for the charging that you want to accomplish. Capital is a huge consideration as well. So these projects are expensive, as I alluded to on the earlier slide. Figuring out what is the best strategy for that. Obviously, there's a lot of well-capitalized companies on this call and that are involved in charging, but it doesn't mean that this is necessarily the best use of your capital. So there's innovative strategies, whether it's charging as a service, where someone can come in, such as a TeraWatt, and invest in your property, and then you pay a monthly fee and amortize that cost. Offsite charging, obviously, which I'll talk about in a second, is the solution there, or creative new financing structures that can help you with this, but something to consider in terms of what is the project cost. And then the last one is scalability. So this is really important too. This is undoubtedly an infrastructure, construction project on your facility that is running live operations. So when you are sizing for the infrastructure for, it could be one truck or it could be 100 trucks, you have to pick a number and build a certain amount of charging. And are you then going to, if you want to scale that fleet over time, come back for a second wave of construction? Or are you going to overbuild, which has capital implications? So on your own property is an opportunity for charging, but there are some considerations and limitations for where it might work for one location, but maybe not every single location that you have in your network. So in terms of throwing a lot out there in terms of what you have to think about as you start going, and just in terms of TeraWatt and our approach to solving problems when we work with our partners, we break it into two categories. So one would be the actual charging infrastructure. And I'll talk about models there. And when we talk about Q&A in the second, or feel free, as David alluded to, throw questions into the chat and we'll do our best to answer them live, what that might mean for you. And then charging services. So that's what happens after the chargers go live. What does that mean for your business? And how do you keep the trucks moving every day? And how do you have a mission critical asset really perform as you need it to? So in terms of charging infrastructure, we have three different models here at TeraWatt, and these are response to working with our partners. And it might be one model in one market, and another in another. And so we call the first two is, on TeraWatt's own property. So we have sites across the country. I'll show a map in a second, focusing on Los Angeles. But when you engage in an offsite charging solution, there are two different ways we can do that. One is a shared site, and the second would be a dedicated site for one fleet. There are pros and cons and considerations for why you'd go one route or the other. But for a shared site, what we've really been trying to figure out there is the best way to make this most efficient from a capital perspective for a fleet. So if we have 20 chargers and you're accessing a shared site, you're only paying for your pro rata share of usage, which makes it much more efficient. We take on that burden, investing in the upfront capital to build the site, develop it, and then you as a fleet would only pay monthly as you use the site, similar to how diesel is paid for today. So it makes it an operating line item as opposed to this upfront capital requirement. And then sharing it across multiple customers, it's much more efficient usage. So you have access to multiple chargers, but you're only paying again for your pro rata share. For the behind the fence, that scenario, which is basically what I've been talking about of developing on your own site, if you put in 5 chargers, first of all, you can only use 5 at once if that's a limiting factor for you, and you're paying for 100% of the utilization for those 5 chargers. So if we have 20 chargers, you can use way more, or you can scale over time back to that scalability piece, which is key, and you're only paying for your pro rata share. And then a build-to-suit model is kind of in between. And so this is where we'd have a dedicated site for one customer, or we could build it to their entire specifications. They'd be paying and using the entirety of the site, but this would be a kind of a hybrid model where if there's limitations for an own facility and we're able to buy a new property next door or in the market that the fleet needs to operate in, We can custom build and put in implementation of any operational considerations they might have for driver amenity buildings or parking or different things like that outside of just charging, which opens up more opportunity for flexibility in terms of duty cycle and what that looks like for when and where the driver is relative to the vehicle charging. And that's a big consideration in general too, which I'll talk about in a second, is when and where and how are you charging these vehicles? What does that mean for your driver's downtime? So it's important to understand what that model is. What's the most efficient usage of your driver's time, and what's the most cost-effective way to get the job done, which is keep the vehicle moving and just make sure that the charger's working. So I talked about the charging side and then the reliability side. So there's a study out of Berkeley in California here that showed that they sampled a random sampling of public passenger vehicle charging, and it found that 22.7% of the time the charger wasn't working, which is a common fault in public charging for passengers, which is unacceptable for fleets. That means twice a week for a driver that the charger wouldn't work. And as I mentioned, being a mission critical asset and enabling your business, we at TeraWatt here have done a lot of work on our own sites and with our own software to make sure that chargers are working. And this is that part I was alluding to about having a plan in place once you've built your charging site to know that if something breaks, well, first of all, hopefully avoiding things breaking in the first place, but if something breaks, you have a plan in place to fix it as quickly as possible. For us, we've put it in our research and development facility in our core market of Los Angeles, where we have spare parts program. We are testing interoperability between hardware and software, the vehicles and the chargers to make sure that they're functioning. If there's a new release, we're being proactive on monitoring that, really trying to limit the amount of fault points that could occur without that solution in place. And these are things that are common, occurrences for why a charger might not work. Maybe there's a new software on the vehicle and it's not matching with the charger. There's a new part that's just faulty and you need to replace it. Or there's things that you can really be proactive about solving ahead of time. And then on top of that, if there is an issue, being able to solve, and fix it over the air through software updates. And then as the last resort, having boots on the ground and parts and making sure that you can go out and fix things if there's just a physical problem. So if someone drives over a cable or something like that, you want to make sure that you have a plan in place to understand how are you swapping that, who are you contacting it to fix it, and what are your SLAs in place to make sure that you can get that fixed as quickly as possible and get your vehicle back on the road. So a really important thing to consider as you're figuring out, what is your plan, who are your partners, and, what's the most important to you. And there's a trade-off, obviously, in terms of cost and value and insurance here in terms of what you're solving for, and all different considerations that, you as the ultimate fleet operator have to figure out. So in terms of the charging times, just a quick little rough math here to show you, as different vehicle options in the market today have different charging speeds. We at TeraWatt are putting in a 350 kilowatt charger at all of our sites to make sure that's the fastest possible in the market today. You'll hear the term MCS or megawatt charging also thrown around as you dive on this journey. And that's definitely a big unlock for the industry where, 1,000+ kilowatts of power delivered to your vehicle. But obviously kilowatts and kilowatt hours and charge rates is much different than mile per gallon and dollar per gallon in diesel terms. So this is all new for folks and different than the existing. But just a quick little math here to show you what does that ultimate charging plan and time look like. So the default, I think, in terms of what's simplest or where people's first thought goes to is my vehicle is going to charge overnight. And if you do have the opportunity where a vehicle has an 8-hour dwell time, that's a great option because you can put in slower charging, which is ultimately going to be cheaper for you and accomplish the task of getting the vehicle charged up for the next day's business. But that's not a luxury that everyone has in their fleet and maybe not in every location to have that long dwell. So, okay, how do you get faster charging and what does that mean? Is that a 2-hour shift change in between where you can get as many miles back? Or is it a few 15 or 30-minute charge, throughout the shift and in between the shift? All things are possible. And it's a question that really also goes back to influencing how much charging do I have at my own site? How powerful is that charging? Can I use a third party like a TeraWatt site that's next door or where I need to get to and incorporate that into my driver's day? All those new things that I think another theme here is just that EV operations are different than diesel operations. And so I think that as folks are going down this journey, we're seeing a lot of interesting and exciting new opportunities to say, well, what is the best way to get my job done, which is move the most amount of freight most effectively and cheapest and with the highest uptime and just have the job be done. So looking from that perspective backwards again, and there are all sorts of different solutions, and we want to be flexible here as a partner listening to the market. But this graph can help you understand a little bit more about what does it actually mean in terms of time relative to charging.
Peter, we have a question from the audience. At TeraWatt stations, either online or in development, are you deploying a mixed offering of charger sizes, or are all chargers at a site at the same kilowatt?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for today, in our heavy duty sites, they are all 350 kilowatts. We have a combination of different stall types, which is either pull through, where we can accommodate a truck with a chassis or a trailer, or bobtail only, which would be, from a spatial perspective, smaller. We can fit more of those, but they don't have as much flexibility operationally as that pull through stall. So on our sites, we're a mixture. For example, we have a site in near the Port of Long Beach in LA that's coming online in a few months. That'll be 10 pull-through stalls and 10 bobtail, to give an option that some folks are going to be charging in between shifts when they won't have a trailer, and we can fit more of those stalls in. But some will need to charge during their routes. And so being able to come with a trailer, maybe they stop for 30 minutes, maybe they stop for an hour. It depends on what their needs are, but we can accommodate the chassis or a trailer. They don't have to go drop that somewhere else. That's a good operational flexibility. We could have fit more bobtail stalls in that site, but it would have limited the operational flexibility for the customer. So it's, for us, something that we want to be receptive also over time. Maybe that changes as the market's evolving. If charge times, go down because we have faster chargers, maybe we do more pull through. We'll see as time goes on, but really right now trying to provide as much flexibility to the customer as possible. And we found that putting in the fastest possible charger is the best solution, because it just means that we can always charge as fast as possible, and we're not limited by that speed to get the job done for the customer. That's a great question. And please all, I know throw in more questions. I'm happy to be responsive here and make this as engaging as possible. So thank you to that first one. So just as a high level of what we're building here is an idea, again, if you, like many fleets that we talk to, have California operations and are focused as your first endeavors in this market, either because there's customer concentration or regulation pushing to adopt in this area, it's the kind of the epicenter for where there's a lot of activity. There's also a lot of rail activity, which is great. So on this map, we have a site in Commerce that's live today. That's near the BNSF Hobart Yard, as well as the Commerce Rail Yard. We have a site in Rialto that's near another rail spur. One in San Bernardino coming online that's also near a rail spur. So a lot of opportunities here, especially for our intermodal partners, which we're really excited to be a member of the IANA. So I didn't mention that at the top, but really appreciate the work that this organization does, bringing folks together like this. And just an opportunity here where if you want to start with a few trucks, we might have a charging option next to your operations. Also a scaled solution. Maybe if you are starting at your own property, you can augment with our solution, either if it's next door and you need extra charging, or as a backup plan, or if it's where you're going to and you want to have extra charging to enable new routes or new lanes. We're really building a network here and want to figure out a solution, either if it's on a customer's own site, using our sites, some combination thereof, to really just bring more opportunity to this market, because we know that charging is needed. It's going to become a scarce resource when power and constraints are going to really impact development timelines. And so we're committed on our journey here to be a good partner. I see another question.
Yeah. Yes, we have another question from one of our attendees. It is good to see the 350 kilowatt charging rates, but what about consideration of the maximum rate at which the batteries of these trucks should be charged?
Mm-hmm. I think this is probably alluding at what is the impact from like an ownership perspective of the battery deterioration relative to charging. I think there's a lot of evolving science around what that means, but the charge rate relative to the size of the battery is quite insubstantial. And so we've seen a lot of advancement pushing towards this megawatt charging standard, which would be even faster. There's been some good testing there in Europe. So it seems like it's not necessarily a consideration in terms of the degradation there, and definitely something that's evolving over time to figure out what that means from like a resale value and the battery over time. But to date, it looks like it's very positive that fast charging is a great solution for heavy duty fleets. But good question. And then I'll close out and we can open up for Q&A here. Just another example of some scrappiness that we're doing here at TeraWatt. So where to start and where to begin, I talked about that a lot, but how do you actually get off the ground, even if it's just one truck and one charger, to really start? So we had a use case where we were working with a carrier partner in the LA basin area, but a shipper came to us and said that they wanted to explore what an EV lane could look like for real operations, but they were north of LA and Lebec, and the range of the truck couldn't get there and back on a full charge. So they needed some assistance of having charging in that warehouse in Lebec. What we were able to do with TeraWatt, and I can actually go to the next slide. So we scoped out the project, did a site walk. They happened to have available power, which was a huge unlock for this process. But in 3.5 weeks, we were able to figure out what is the solution we need to have. We have a charger on a pallet that we can bring to the customer site. We were able to install that in 2 days. We rented it to them effectively for a 1-month pilot. And that gave them and the carrier partner confidence to know, okay, great. We've tested this. We've seen the capability of the truck. We were able to charge at both ends of the route to figure out what this could look like at scale, to now go back and say, if we wanted to plan this with 10 trucks running every day or whatever it might be, that they know exactly what it means for one truck, given that we were able to test it. So we had a 100% charge success rate, which meant that every single time that the truck plugged in, our charger worked, which was great. And that's our mission to be done. So we moved quickly, made it cost effective, and the charger worked every day. So mission accomplished. But I think it really speaks to our flexibility in trying to meet the market and say, there's gonna be a whole range of solutions, from scrappy little pilots like this to more robust solutions on a customer site to offsite charging to everywhere in between. And really just appreciate the audience here engaging and trying to learn more about what they have to understand to engage with charging and get going with electric vehicles, especially within intermodal applications. So would love to open up to questions and dialogue, and David and I have some discussion points also, but I think this would be most effective just understanding what you at the audience have questions on and want to dig deeper on, and appreciate truly spending the time in your day to talk about this.
We don't have any questions, so we'll wait for them to come in. But just from my perspective, great presentation, really lots of information. Where I kind of go back to is, and maybe something for you to speak about is, that initial conversation that a business owner is having about this investment. And it's kind of a, when they're starting the conversations, is that the time to bring in TeraWatt in a company like TeraWatt? Or is it later on, once you have a better sense of how many charging stations you might need? Or how does that process work? Is it in tandem? Is it separate? Is there a point where you should come in? Is it too late or too early?
I think, and as early as possible, I think is the best solution, honestly, because as you're figuring out, I've shared a good amount of information today, but I think a lot of what is important here is tailored specifically to the needs of each individual fleet. There is no set playbook for what this has to look like and the steps to follow, because it is so nuanced and specific on each individual site and fleet's needs. So I would say, I'm sure you'll have my contact information. We would love to speak with everybody as early as possible, even if it's just an introductory call to understand what are the considerations in front of you, where are you starting, to then, plot out a roadmap of when we can have real engagements and understand with respect to a actual project, how to get that off the ground and where to start and how to start adding things on. Because I think the worst thing would be you're already halfway down the road and you're knees deep in a project, and then all of a sudden you're hit with a problem and you don't know who to contact, and then you're figuring out who has the resources in the team and how do you understand how to work with each other. And you might make some decisions that are not ideal because you're trying to just get the job done. So I think being proactive, starting early, is the best possible solution. It's never too early. Even if you're saying, I don't even want to adopt EVs, tell me why I should, or something like that, I'll happily try and convince you. But I think it early is better.
Great. Well, we have some questions coming in. So
right.
First one, for these behind the fence applications, have BESS been looked at to help offset peak demand charging rates?
So BESS, there's a lot of acronyms in this industry. That's Battery Energy Storage System. So you'll also hear DER, which is Distributed Energy Resource. Basically, things that you can put on site, both for mitigation of cost as well as reliability of the site. So the answer to the question is yes. And I would throw into that mix also microgrid solutions, which are anything from a diesel generator, which is obviously not ideal because it's bringing emissions just onto the site as opposed to displacing them or using renewable energy. But you're seeing all sorts of interesting ways to figure out, how do I, again, back to the question of get charging going as quickly as possible, as cheap as possible, and as effectively as possible. Batteries are a great way to offset peak costs. So when you look at a utilities pricing, when you go to a gas station, diesel is the same price all day. Obviously that can change over time, but it's not because I went at 10 a.m. versus 4 p.m. that the diesel was different. Electrification is differently. It's very consistent pricing throughout the year. Obviously, there's like some seasonality to it with summer and winter, but the time of day is really important. So if you want to charge, at least in California, in Los Angeles area, 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. is the peak time. And so the prices go up pretty dramatically. If you have a battery on site, there's a calculation to be done there. So is the cost of the battery, which is, not nothing, relative to if you really need to charge during the peak time, okay, well, the battery will help you not pay the peak charges because it can charge up overnight when the energy's cheap and then dispense energy. So you're not actually drawing from the grid during that 4 to 9 p.m. period. As well, the battery can serve, if ever there's an outage, which is something that people like to ask about, the battery can serve to give you energy when the utility goes down, if that's a consideration. So it's definitely a question there of how much is that worth to the business? Can you avoid the peak cost? Hopefully you're in an area where there are not many outages relative to paying for the battery to implement on site. As well, I mentioned the microgrid. That's a way maybe to start getting power earlier if you're stuck in one of these power jams where they say, well, we can't get it to you for 3 years. Well, what does that solution look like? Are there microgrids you can put in place to help? Solar is kind of in that conversation too. So lots of considerations. I think as you're noticing, this can get very nuanced very quickly. A lot of acronyms, a lot of terms, a lot of people and parties to engage. And so we aspire to be just a one-stop shop to have all sorts of resources at your disposal because every location is different and it might be a different solution and need based on different considerations.
That's a great response. Couple more questions. What can you share with us about hydrogen refueling? Is this something you are looking into? It appears that the federal government is incentivizing this type of technology development in addition to pure electric trucks.
Yeah, I think hydrogen is interesting. We are not currently focused on hydrogen. We are solely focused on electrification, both for a local/regional trucking application, as well as the corridor, the longer haul. We're electrifying the I-10 every 150 miles from LA to El Paso as our kind of stake in the ground. Hydrogen, I think, gets a lot of focus just given the range capabilities of the vehicles today. I will say that it's still far away, seemingly in a perspective from the technology being ready, as well as green hydrogen, which again, back to the top of why are we doing all this is for emissions reduction. Green hydrogen is extremely expensive/elusive, and the technology is still far away. So I think the range today relative to the vehicle technology, batteries are getting cheaper, the range is getting better, charge times are coming down. We feel pretty confidently that's going to be the solution for all applications. But there is still attention being brought to hydrogen to see if it could be a solution for those longer haul applications. So I think technology development will be the answer to what's viable. There's government funding for both types of technology. I hope that kind of addresses the question. It's an interesting one. I think that the market is still uncertain about the outcome.
Next question. What are some complications TeraWatt has run into with getting their projects entitled approved? I'm specifically curious what issues your team have run into with local jurisdictions.
That's a great question. And I think, a lot of people talk about the utility times and poking at that as like a reason why projects maybe take longer than they would hope. Permitting and zoning is an interesting one. I think in California specifically, especially in LA, where there is a market that has a lot of attention from different projects being developed and a lot of government involvement, it is a somewhat known thing that, hey, electric charging, okay, we have 10 of those projects kind of going on. We get what that is. We've seen that, at least for our business model, which is a newer one, the shared charging, it comes down to the AHJ level where they may or may not have awareness of what that means because there aren't that many use cases to point to yet. And so excited for 2024 to be an inflection point there where there's more familiarity with what these projects are and we can point to them. But it is something that we've worked on a lot of education and local stakeholder engagement to figure out, meeting with the local governments, making sure that they're involved in understanding of what this means for their community and the emissions offsets. Outside of California, where there are just fewer projects, it is newer. So it is something that if you're entering a new market to be aware of, I mentioned you get utility engagement as quickly as possible, but also engage with your landlord, if that is not yourself, and or your AHJ to understand what this means and what the process looks like. That can definitely be a bottleneck and an unexpected one sometimes, which is a really unfortunate use case or unfortunate occurrence when it happens. So this is back to my first point of figure out who all internally and externally you have to get involved to accomplish a project to make sure that there are no surprises.
I'm just going to hold off on the next question because I just want to follow up on one that kind of is in the back of my mind. In terms of dealing with the utility companies, kind of from their perspective, how are they dealing with kind of all this ramped up request for resources in an already strained environment? How are they kind of prioritizing that?
Yeah, it's a great one. And the one that comes up a lot, right? I think planning is the most important thing. So for us, working with utility very closely to say, hey, look, this is how we're viewing your market today in the next 10 years, and being able to plan with them effectively so that we are not hit with any bottlenecks, they are not hit with any bottlenecks, and we can figure out the most cost-effective way. That's another reason why we think that shared charging is a really good strategy for the market in aggregate, in the sense of we can put a site amongst 6 different warehouses, and maybe we have enough charging to accommodate all those trucks, versus 6 separate projects, which is 6 separate projects for the utility to deal with at varying scales and awareness of how to manage their processes. But it's something that they're being proactive about, of getting out there, understanding who are the interested parties, what does that scaled solution look like. So while everyone is, there's a lot of focus on the pilot project of, I want to start with my first vehicles and where do you go from there, having a lot of ability to show the utility, here's where I'm building ultimately, and this is where I'm working backwards, gives them the confidence to go and build. So it's all of this just open dialogue, making sure that people are sharing strategic roadmaps to understand what no one's caught, again, pinched back against the wall in a timeline that doesn't work for them.
Thank you. Our next question, heavy-duty EVs are extraordinarily expensive, and operational changes to adopting EVs are difficult. Beyond CO2 reduction, what are the benefits of heavy-duty EVs, and how can we drive adoption faster?
Great question. Thank you for that one. So, one is costs are coming down. So I think the biggest thing in all of that is the more folks asking for EVs brings up production volumes, brings down costs. But in terms of the operational benefits, energy is a lot more stable than diesel pricing. That fluctuation in diesel pricing means uncertain fuel costs, where electrification can be really stable, and you can plan out a years of operations with a known fueling cost. So that operational stability, I think, is really important. Savings on fewer moving parts, different from an O&M and maintenance perspective on the vehicle side. I think as folks are really adopting these vehicles, are seeing the differences of what that means versus diesel. I think it's some different parts. Obviously, tires is a known one, that these vehicles are heavier, so they're going through more tires, but fewer moving parts on the engine side means less maintenance cost. And those are I think 2. I think the other one is driver sentiment. So we've heard a lot of positive feedback from any driver that's been in and around these vehicles, from I don't smell like diesel when I go home, it's quieter, it's comfier, doesn't hurt my back. So in terms of the community, that's really important to moving these vehicles around. It's a really strong benefit for them. So I think those all are really the big ones that I hear initially. But I think as just there's more adoption and more usage of these things, I'm sure we'll learn a lot more about prolonged benefits with longer usage.
That's great. I don't see any more questions. So if folks have questions, let's go ahead and get them in. But in the meantime, so Peter, what do you see? What are your plans? What are TeraWatt's thoughts about what the next 3 to 5 years, 10 years, kind of how is this going to evolve?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really exciting to be an unlock with respect to this shipper carrier charging infrastructure provider ecosystem. At least historically and right now, I think that given that there's been just fewer pilots, or not as many as there will be ultimately this year, next year, and ongoing, the shipper carrier relationship has been mostly one-to-one, where folks are looking for confidence that if they're investing in this newer technology, they have a customer on the other end that's committed to a long time frame, because without that, they're worried that this commitment to capital for these newer technologies will be unmet. Obviously, there's a lot of operational learnings to be had just from exploring the technology, but ultimately it's to get a job done, which is to move freight, right? So I think I'm really excited to see, as this ecosystem is evolving and we're having these conversations and implementing these solutions, where it's not as risky to go out and start ramping up your vehicle count, because there's ways to offset your infrastructure costs, a la like an offsite model where you're only paying for what you use. That takes that conversation from a CapEx outlay to an operational cost. That's already really exciting and dramatic. There's more opportunities to charge, whether it's on your own site or offsite, to enable more routes. So it's, again, opening up the aperture for what's possible, and more carriers and shippers talking to each other and having solutions, more shippers involved in the EV ecosystem as ESG mandates start ramping up. I think I mentioned at the top that we hear Intermodal as a sustainable solution that's getting a lot of attention, which is really exciting. And I think adding electric vehicles on the front and tail ends of those routes will be a really, really, really powerful solution as folks look beyond just what's been the levers that they've pulled in before to start meeting their sustainability goals, EV has to be one of them if they're engaged in ground transportation. And so as that really starts picking up momentum, I think it'll be really exciting to see how that the lift to get involved and to start implementing these assets dramatically lowers.
Thank you. We have another question. Actually, we have two more coming in. What recommendations do you have for individuals and businesses located in areas susceptible to prolonged power outages, such as those caused by hurricanes or other natural disasters?
For sure. That's it. I mean, that's kind of back to the battery question from earlier. And I started talking about the microgrids. It might be a scenario where, given your environment, and just for getting the business done, you have to invest in more robust backup solutions. So maybe it's solar canopies to give you some power, a larger battery solution, maybe an auxiliary backup generator or something to that end, to know that given the market that you're in, there's just conditions that are out of your control. And it's a question of how much are you willing to invest in those insurance policies effectively versus, comfortable with some outages. And so there's a lot of, I think the utilities, back to your point, are doing a lot of work knowing that this is becoming more and more important to day-to-day critical, fleet assets to accommodate that. But there's some work that you can do on your own site or on a project like ours to also build a robust solution.
Another attendee is asking, do you have distributed chargers as opposed to all-in-one to enable dynamic power sharing?
That's a good question. So on our sites today, at least, we do have enough power to distribute to every charger at maximum power. So, we have a 7 megawatt site and the chargers take up 7 megawatts of power. We are exploring opportunities in the future where we could be more creative with, if we only had 4 megawatts, but we want to put in more ports, can we share that load effectively throughout the site? It's all a question of what is, again, the most efficient way to use the site relative to the power available. For us, we've been really, we have a really amazing real estate team that's going out and finding these needles in the haystack where it's conveniently located near where the fleets need them to be, with power and space that meets our business model. But definitely back to that, we're investing in that hardware lab where we are testing all sorts of different suppliers to make sure we have the best solution. It might be a different solution in the future than what we've put in today, but we're committed to figuring that out so that, again, our partners don't have to and can just rely on us to be like the one-stop shop for all things that they need. But great question.
And related, we have another question. How have the rolling blackouts and the power grid affected the ability to recharge heavy-duty EVs in California? And this is a multi-part question, so I'm going to ask them in pockets. So let's start with that one right there.
We haven't really seen it be an impact truly on, I think, where these sites are located and the power that's been given to them. So I think that obviously as time goes on and there's more projects in different areas, we'll have more information there. But so far I don't think it's been a meaningful impact at all.
This attendee is asking, second part is, I've heard these vehicles are heavier than a standard heavy duty truck powered by a traditional diesel motor. Doesn't that affect the weight payload they can handle?
That is true. So there is an exemption in California, at least, I think it's national actually, for the weight of the EV, just given it's a heavier asset than the diesel truck. I think today that is something that's being abated by what is the product that you're carrying and how many loads and what can you do there. So definitely that is a known consideration for EVs, but something that we're hopeful with advancements in technology as batteries get more powerful. So, more range for less weight, that will be overcome.
And the final one, which you may or may not have anything that you can affect, but are the insurance costs associated higher due to not collecting on highway road taxes the state and federal government usually collects at the pump?
Is that, I guess, insurance costs on the vehicle? We don't, I'm assuming this is vehicle insurance. Which
I'm not sure if she means a vehicle or if there are any taxes associated.
I don't know if the anonymous person
you're
can
paying with
their own question, but we are aware of the different vehicles in the market, obviously from a perspective of how fast can they charge and what does it mean to engage with our sites, but we don't engage on financing or touching the vehicles. We feel like that's our partner's business. So enough to understand what their vehicles mean for their business, but not from an insurance perspective. So I don't think I can answer that.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit about highway taxes too, that are, when you go to traditional, to gas up, you have the associated fees. Yes. The attendee is clarifying vehicle taxes is what I meant, as the EVs are incredibly expensive to begin with.
Yeah, I don't have any information on that one.
That seems to be all of our questions, but from your perspective, from where you sit, and the companies you've worked with so far, how have you found do you find it easier or harder with each implementation? Or are they all just so unique that they each come with their own set of parameters?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, and I'll give a plug to the NACFE Run on Less program, which I think has been a really great education source in the market, and commend all that they do over there. So check out runonless.com, and there's a lot more insight into some existing operations out there. But I think as folks are adopting more vehicles, it is getting easier. There's been more proof points to show what this means. There's been more sharing of knowledge and learnings about how to get things done. There's been more awareness of what the potential surprises could be so that they aren't surprises for the next operator. A lot of that does, though, that come down to what does it mean for your specific business. So it's not entirely a reliability. You can't just rely on everyone else has figured it out for me, so I might as well sit back and wait, and then I'll make a big step later. I think I would still highly encourage getting engaged in a pilot or a first operation, whatever it means, so you are familiar with what this means for your specific business, because everyone's different. There are a lot of shared learnings that we can be applied from a development perspective, and suggestions of how to implement electric vehicle charging, but ultimately understanding what it means for your internal systems, for your business, for the key decision makers. I didn't talk about the localized dispatcher and operators and the drivers and making sure that they're comfortable. This is really going to touch all pieces of a business for a carrier. And so understanding what it means, I think, is extremely important. So the good news is that there's a lot to point to. There's a lot of resources, a lot of really excited partners who would love to work with you, ourselves very much included, and can share all that we've learned and grow with you on this journey. But truly, it does come down to a personalized level of getting comfortable with the technology, similar to how diesel vehicles are operated today. Everyone has their different strategies for O&M and what that means to their business, and why their system is the best. And so I think this truly is a competitive advantage for those who get started early, and would just love to be part of the ride with you.
That's great. So that sounded like you were wrapping things up, but I also want to just give you the opportunity that if you wanted to share any last thoughts or comments, please do so.
Sure. Yeah, and appreciate the time, David, and the audience here with all of you folks. Like I said, we're really excited to be embarking on this journey and have some really exciting partners that we're working with. Would recommend that anybody who had the time today or sees this recording is interested in learning more, feel free to reach out to us, either TeraWattInfrastructure.com or email me, find me on LinkedIn, but really just want to be a knowledge base and engage with folks and see how we can decarbonize the world together.
That's fantastic. Peter, this has been a really informative session. I'm sure it's going to be the first of many as people embark on this journey. And we thank you very much for sharing your time, your expertise. And we look forward to seeing you at future IANA events so that you'll be available to chat with all of our members. And I would like to thank our audience for attending today. Thank you all very much for your time this afternoon. And we look forward to talking with you again soon.